Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Foreman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Marketplace.City. We're a company based up in Chicago that provides market research on government technology. Very excited to moderate this panel today. I've got some excellent panelists, and I'm going to let them do the majority of the speaking today. So we'd like to get started by letting my panelists kind of introduce themselves. We have a very interesting topic, which I think is very relevant across the country now, that the federal government has started passing some of the ability to pilot and test new technologies in air mobility down to states and to a local level. We're very fortunate to have some of our states, particularly the state of Michigan, take advantage of these opportunities. And then some very forward-thinking vendors and companies that are also participating here. So we're very fortunate to have our panelists here today. So let's start with introductions. Justine, get us started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Justine Johnson, Chief Mobility Officer for the state of Michigan. I lead the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, so that means all things about how we're moving people, goods, and information across land, water, and air. So today, I'll focus on the air component of this conversation. But Michigan has been leading a lot of work specifically around advanced air mobility. Our goal is really to be the state that's leading manufacturing to support the drone and as well as eVTOL industry. We released a statewide strategy last December, which really sets out our goals for the next couple of years when it comes to having active deployments, attracting the right types of companies to build, test, commercialize, and scale in Michigan, and also aligning grant opportunities and state resources to support both commercial and defense-related activities for drones and eVTOL. So really happy to be here today.
Thank you very much. And we have Lydon Sleeper as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lydon Sleeper. I'm the head of U.S. strategic policy for Joby Aviation. So Joby Aviation is building an eVTOL, an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that we want to run as an air taxi in cities across the country. So you can imagine a world in the not too distant future where you can open up your Uber app and see Uber X, Uber Black, or Uber Air powered by Joby, and Uber will come to your house, pick you up, take you to the closest heliport or vertiport, which is infrastructure specifically for aircraft like ours. You'll jump on your Joby maybe to the airport or wherever you're trying to go, and then hop on your flight, and then same when you get home. So thinking about deploying these aircraft in the US and all over the world in the next couple of years. So the technology is really advancing incredibly quickly, and by the end of this decade, you may be riding on an air taxi, which is really cool.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, can you tell me a little bit, you mentioned sort of coming to the U.S. or starting to expand the U.S., what have been some sort of recent events or unlocks to this industry that have sort of advanced this technology, further than it has been?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So I think there's a couple pieces to that. One, we've been developing this aircraft since 2009, so the technology has really matured. But I think there's a couple things to call out that we need in order to unlock it. One, we need a federally certified aircraft. So we need the aircraft to be certified by the FAA so that we can carry passengers and carry passengers for revenue. That is appropriately a long and deliberate process where the FAA is very, very rigorous in making sure that everything on our aircraft does exactly what we say it can do, that the aircraft can get people from point A to point B safely. So we have been working through the FAA certification progress for the last few years. What's really exciting now and in this moment is the federal government launched the EIPP program, which is the eVTOL Integrated Pilot Program, which will help us move our certification process forward and actually start to pilot these operations in markets around the country. So think about New York, right here in Florida, Texas. You'll actually see these aircraft flying around very, very soon doing commercial-like operations, so flying from heliports to urban cores and back, and then flying around the region, all under the supervision of the FAA so that we can do it safely, we can integrate into the airspace safely, and we can show that the aircraft is ready for these type of missions right now.
Yeah, because you mentioned, you said in our kind of warm-up to this that the federal government is obviously, key, has been driving this for forever, but now the EIPP has sort of opened up markets, or local markets more. You're now coordinating with state and local government more than you ever have before?
Yeah, I think the thing that's been fascinating about the last year in aviation and in advanced aerial mobility, for a long, long time, industry will look at different markets and work with different cities and states and say, hey, we would really like to launch here. We would really like to bring our product there. What the EIPP has done, which is incredibly exciting for us, is it's made it so that state and local governments are coming to us to partner with industry to go to the federal government and say, we want to be first. So we've taken away a little bit of that dynamic where we're trying to work with different cities and states to see who's most interested, and now we're partnering with them actively and the federal government to advance this technology. So it's really flipped the script about how public-private partnerships can work and work all the way up to the federal government to launch new technologies and show that American companies and American technology is ready to change the world. So it's a super exciting moment, and I think a fundamentally a different way for government to interact with aviation and with state and local governments.
Yeah, and speaking of the state and local, no better state than Michigan to talk about the future of mobility, right? Sort of the heart of mobility in the United States. Tell me were you the first chief mobility officer at a state level?
So I am the second.
Second, okay.
Second chief mobility officer. There was someone before me in the role, but I've really spent a lot of time focusing on advanced air mobility. And so really proud, Governor Whitmer last year announced an executive directive that really focuses on a whole of government approach for advanced air mobility. So that means bringing state resources together. That means pursuing and making sure that our manufacturing and our economic development incentives, et cetera, are working in alignment to support the growth of the industry within the state of Michigan. We are home to 98 of the top 100, 98 tier 1 suppliers out of the top 100. And so that's something that's really important to us because we think about the big opportunities to manufacture drones, especially after the American drone dominance policies that came out as part of the Trump administration's announcement probably about 2 years ago. We really have to get to a point where we are manufacturing in the United States. Mm-hmm. Manufacturing is within our DNA within the state of Michigan, right. And so making sure we have those opportunities for diversification of the manufacturing core is important.
Yeah, and so you mentioned sort of coordinating with other departments, a whole of state approach to this, right? So it's not just airports and departments of aviation. So tell me like some of the other use cases that you all have identified across the state, across various state departments, where you see the use of this technology.
Yeah, so just in terms of some of the partnerships, we work with labor and economic opportunity on all things workforce, so making sure that our workforce is prepared and skilled for these opportunities. Of course, the Economic Development Corporation, a fourth of our state's gross domestic product comes from the automotive industry, so we want to have more opportunities to grow that number specifically with advanced air mobility. We work very closely with the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. Mm-hmm. We do have a location in Michigan called NADWIC, which stands for National All-Domain Warfighting Center. NADWIC recently received a federal designation about a month ago, and this is going to allow for deep UAS type of testing to happen. So really supporting beyond visual line of sight flight activity within the state. We're the first of what will be 3 total designations. So we're really excited about those big opportunities, work very closely with them. We also have an Office of Aerospace Defense and Innovation, and that is really preparing our manufacturing core to get the right types of certifications that they need so that they can actually pursue defense-related applications. Because just because you can manufacture cars, that's one thing, but if you want a defense-related contract, of course, is a different type of certification that these manufacturers need to have in play. And we've done a lot of really cool programs. We have an Advanced Aerial Mobility Activation Grant Program, and since we launched that program last year, we've issued a little over $10 million. So companies are doing things like providing charging infrastructure at airports to support emerging aircraft. So again, eVTOL. We're also doing work with CVS Health is going to be doing specialty prescription drug deliveries when we talk about using drones for that type of activity. We're working with university partners as well. We have a location with the University of Michigan called M-Air, And essentially this was on the ground, a autonomous vehicle testing location. Now we're taking that from the ground to the air. So really encompassing how advanced air mobility is going to be fully integrated into the way autonomy is going to look like in the state as well.
So yeah, and you're looking at a full range of products and cargo and that are being shipped. I mean, I know, Lydon, you're primarily focused on shipping humans, right?
People,
or biologics of different
Yeah.
different sorts. But yeah, I mean, and that obviously is the most challenging element of this. But there's an entry level to this, right? Where we're not just jumping straight to human flight, even though that would be fantastic from my perspective. But yeah, you mentioned shipping for medical equipment, medical devices, organs, things like that. Like where are you seeing that sort of critical need?
So we've identified 4 priority use cases for Michigan. That is drones as a first responder. So how do we work with our first response teams to really understand how drones can help them to do their job even better? Because it's a lot of work when you get a 911 dispatch call. You're just sending out resources to something that is unknown. So how can drones actually get that situational awareness so you can match people who can actually respond in a better way? That's one piece. The other piece of this is B2B logistics. Of course, I mentioned before the manufacturing ecosystem. There's many parts and pieces that move throughout the state of Michigan. There's also interstate as well, so other states nearby, and as well as our proximity to an international border. So right now focusing on how can we start to get more parts and pieces, specifically fasteners, tools, smaller pieces that we could move back and forth to support some of that just-in-time delivery of services and goods for manufacturing. So think about that, person who works on an assembly line, you need a certain part, you need it to get there pretty quickly using drones to do that. The other piece is agriculture. Agriculture is another big part of the work that we do within the state. So how can drones help with pesticide control from seeding, crop analysis, and more? How do you see if there's locations within the state where someone may be overspraying? How do you start to get information of that air quality information right then and there? And then lastly, defense. And as I mentioned before, because we have defense assets within the state, connecting the dots, especially from the commercial to defense-related applications, to support a lot of the work that's happening between DOW right now and the state of Michigan. So we want to make sure that we have a robust ecosystem and attracting those players to help within those 4 priority areas. So yes, the people movement piece is important. I know Lydon's going to talk a lot about that, but we're also thinking how can we utilize this technology right now to deal with our most pressing needs. And we have a statewide advanced air mobility challenge that's happening. It's the first that we've ever done this before. So we're excited about this work where we're providing grant funding to innovators to respond to some of the pressing needs utilizing drone technology.
Excellent. That challenge is coming out
It's
this year.
It's out.
Okay,
So
all
yeah,
right.
it
So
started
for
in
the
December.
Companies out there.
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. In Lydon, yeah. So states like Michigan are taking big steps and to create test beds and to start testing and pilots. But as we mentioned, with Joby transporting humans, it's a bigger chasm to cross. What does a company like Joby need governments to do in order to start, crossing that chasm, taking those steps, enabling you all to do your work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a couple pieces to that. So infrastructure is one of them, right? We need a place to take off and land, right? We built and designed the aircraft to fold into the aviation ecosystem on day one. So we don't need a lot on day one, but there's some things that we need to scale. So infrastructure, we need a place for us to take off and land. We can land at a heliport, and we want to charge. Our aircraft is all electric. And so when we land, we want to charge. It's got a range of 100 miles, so think about moving around a region, different points. I spend a lot of my day working with airports around the country to figure out where we can integrate into their ecosystem, into the airport, into the airspace safely so that we don't disrupt existing commercial traffic. So from a state and local level, and a credit to Justine in Michigan, who've done a lot of thinking about that, it's investments in infrastructure, especially with charging, retrofitting existing aviation infrastructure so that if you have a heliport that exists today, we could take off and land. Let's make sure the codes are ready, that everything is safe, that all the fire suppression systems are ready. So there's a lot that the state and local government can do with their existing aviation infrastructure. And then I think the long-term vision, and it's what we spend a lot of time working with both the FAA and state and local governments on, is how do we think about building new infrastructure for aircraft like ours? One of the big unlocks for us, we believe, is our aircraft is whisper quiet when it flies overhead. I think everyone is familiar with a helicopter. You can hear it coming from literally miles away. If we were to, if our aircraft were to take off at the stage over there, you might not hear it. It's that quiet. And so we think that that's going to be allow for a different value proposition for communities around the country, where they may not want to tolerate a loud helicopter that lands, you know, a block away, because that's going to rattle their house and they're going to feel
They
it.
can barely tolerate pickleball in their towns. I mean, now a drone flying over them is going to be a big topic.
Try landing a giant helicopter, but for us, because we're quiet and we're emissions free, we think that that value proposition to communities are going to be fundamentally different. And so working with cities and states to come up with new ways to build infrastructure more quickly for aircraft like ours is a main thing that I think cities and states can start to do now, because they haven't contemplated building new aviation infrastructure in years in a lot of places because communities can't tolerate the noise. That paradigm needs to shift a little bit, and we need to work with city and state governments to help do that, help educate local communities about what aircraft like ours are, and then work through their regulatory process so that it's not a 10-year, you know, regulatory review in order to build a new vertiport for us. That's going to slow down the industry, and we really want to upgrade existing infrastructure now. Great. That's building off a lot of the progress that places like Detroit and Michigan and cities around the country have made, adding charging for EVs. Now, they've put the electricity in, they know what they're doing. Airports have run power to the parking garage across to the terminal. Now we're sort of saying, great, you've run the power. Can we think about new infrastructure on the parking garage across from their terminal so that we can drop you off and you can walk in just like you got dropped off by a taxi at the curb? So I think really thinking about the integration of this aircraft and new infrastructure into communities in a different way is going to be one of the big unlocks for cities and state governments.
Now you mentioned like part of it is be able to create the space to be able to test, and because this isn't all immediately happening in our inner cities and very dense environments, right? Michigan has taken some steps to sort of create test beds and create areas to be able to trial and pilot these technologies. Tell us what it took for you to be able to do that.
Lots and lots of conversations, sometimes not being on the same page, but acknowledging where we're trying to go as a state is something that's very important. We do have a drone port in Detroit. It is on the rooftop of Michigan Central. It's at New Lob, actually, across from the Michigan Central, which is our mobility innovation zone. And having that drone port has been so important because, to Lydon's point, how do you make sure that the community is aware of what is happening? We did something called an International Dronut Day. That day I showed up to work, and there were about 300 young students from Detroit public schools, somewhere age range between, I guess, second grade. How old is a second grader? I don't know. Seven to about 14 okay, 7 to about 14 years old. And essentially we had a 16-year-old operator who had their Part 107 license that picked up drones. So we picked up donuts and used the drones, used the air loop drone, actually put a dozen donuts in there. At the time, this is Mayor Duggan, received that package and handed out donuts to construction workers in Hart Plaza. So really connecting those opportunities. We tell young folks, if you know how to operate a remote control for a game console, you can actually operate a drone, and really making sure they understand those job opportunities as well. So having those test beds start to bring communities to the technology so that they can see it, they can ask the questions, they can learn more. When you unlock the opportunities for drones, you have a better conversation of what does this look like when we talk about moving people as well. That's one location. M-Air is another one. So now there's this corridor between Detroit and Ann Arbor, Michigan, about 42 miles, building the drone port technology at the University of Michigan to really connect Ann Arbor to Detroit. hoping that is going to facilitate more opportunities around R&D, bringing more young folks to the technology, STEAM and STEM students. Michigan State also is another great partner as well with providing resources for folks as well. So it's really important. We also, I must mention this because we have this location at the Gerald R. Ford Airport, which is called Flight Ford Launchpad for Innovative Technology and Entrepreneurship. What the flight program does is essentially there's a small part of the airport that's carved out for any type of aviation testing. So our partner there is Southwest Airlines. So you do see actually in the terminal, you'll see a lot of different technology being deployed, from autonomous wheelchair technology all the way to autonomous lawn mowing technology that's happening at the airport as well. And that is helping us to think about what will the future of airports look like, especially when we talk about that in an urban and regional setting. So all of those parts and pieces are really important to the work that we're doing. We did have an uncrewed triple challenge last year on a defense-related side. So we had that location that was opened up as well as at Camp Grayling. We actually had a company that broke a world record by picking up a 10-pound package. So the challenge was land, water, air. That company was Sci-Fly, picked up a package. That day was about 34 miles per hour wind gusts, so I actually didn't think they were going to be able to complete the challenge. But despite all the winds, they were able to travel about 60 plus miles with this particular package. So these test beds are allowing companies to test that technology, see what happens, and also continue to work with our ecosystem to say, hey, I can actually build my parts, I can get my drones repaired, I can get new parts and pieces all within the ecosystem within the state of Michigan.
That's amazing, because I know, like, there are obviously, companies that are established like Joby. You had to start from somewhere, right? The company, I don't know the origin story, but in this field, it seems like there are a lot of established players. There are a lot of that. It's years of engagement and testing and piloting that it could seem quite daunting for a founder or an entrepreneur to step into this space. But at the same time, it seems like there's so many opportunities with the grant programs, the test beds, like you mentioned, operating out of New Lab in Detroit and working with the universities. What's the reality like if I'm a university student, a grad student, or an early founder, and I want to get into this into this industry? What are sort of your recommendations there? Because I think that's what you're looking for, is to inspire people to get into this industry. What would you recommend to them if you're 20-something wants to get into this space?
I'll actually start before you're 20. 16 years old. If anyone in this room has a 16-year-old, whether that's a child, friend, family member, etc., please tell them to look up your requirements to be a Part 107 drone operator. They can make $40 an hour just by flying a drone. So they could do that for real estate purposes, commercial purposes, take pictures at concerts. All of that is helping them to open the door to be a part of the advanced air mobility industry altogether. So that's like one small thing that you can do. And again, 16 years old, up to $40 an hour, which is a game changer. I wasn't making $40 at 16 years old, and I wish I was. But I digressed. Anyways, there's also, in terms of Michigan, we do have something called a prototype grant program. So anyone who is a maker, it doesn't matter for us, as long as you're making that technology in the state of Michigan, you can apply for funding to make your next thing. So if you have an idea and you want to take that idea from a concept that you might have on a piece of paper and actually get a tangible product, there is grant funding to support companies. Our youngest founder, he is now probably 20, but at the time when he received grant funding, he was 17 years old. So there's no age to this. A founder is a founder, whether you're 17 or whether you're 86. You have a good idea, you have a good product, we want to provide that grant funding for you. Again, our Advanced Air Mobility Activation Fund supports those who are looking for funding, whether that's infrastructure or actual deployment. So there are a bunch of different resources that we do have available in the state, and working with our workforce partners to make sure we connect the dots as well, and academia.
Could I also, I think building on that, I would encourage generally thinking about careers in aviation, right? So I started my life in government working for elected officials, and then was able to work with Justine at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and I found aviation late. But I think what's fascinating about this moment and potentially the next 10, 15 years is aviation is going to be much more accessible to a wider swath of people than exists today and over the last couple of years. So for example, we took up simulators, like little VR simulators to Aviation High School in New York City. Aviation High School in New York City produces more aircraft maintenance technicians than almost anywhere in the country. We dropped 4 simulators down onto the floor, and those kids picked up flying the Joby aircraft in minutes, to the point where they were then teaching the next class of kids how to fly the aircraft. And we brought in the commissioner or the chancellor of the New York City school system. They were teaching the chancellor how to fly. They can pick it up so quickly. And to Justine's point about the workforce development ladder, in aviation today, there's a huge sort of missing rung in the workforce development system, especially for pilots, right? In order to be a pilot, you need to fly a lot of hours, you need to get on a lot of training time. The path to becoming a pilot is complicated. I think what advanced aerial mobility and aircraft like ours, our aircraft is piloted, right? So you will be able to get your pilot's license, we're gonna train you on the aircraft, and then you can fly it. You'll be able to get the hours you need flying the Joby aircraft around markets around the country to get your pilot's license to fly the larger aircraft. So we think that we're going to fill in that missing rung of the workforce development ladder. Some people are going to stay and fly with us because they're going to say, I would rather stay at home. I'd rather tuck my kids in at night. Being a pilot, you're traveling all over. That's great for some, but not for everyone. So we think that there's going to be the ability of the industry to fill in that missing workforce development rung on both the pilot side and the aircraft maintenance side. And I think it's a really interesting, exciting opportunity, because a lot of the people who are taking care of aircraft right now aren't going to understand what the Joby aircraft is, because it's a fundamentally different propulsion system than what exists in helicopters or traditional aviation today. It's a lot closer to maintaining a Tesla. So we need to train an entirely new workforce on aircraft like ours to maintain it. Those are software engineers, right? Those are aerospace software engineers, and those are people who we need to train on this new aircraft. So I guess there's a long way of saying, I would encourage people to think about aviation, because the aviation ecosystem will be different in 5, 10, 15 years, and we're all gonna be here in 2040 being like, whoa, this is how we're getting around now. So it's a great time now to get interested and dive in.
Awesome. So on the flip side of that, so we're looking at the individual, or the entrepreneur, but we have a lot of government folks in the audience as well. Not everyone is not everyone's peers are not as forward thinking as, say, the state of Michigan in sort of leading in this effort. I'm an aviation director, or I am a elected leader, even a mayor in a city, or county commissioner. I'd love to see this advancement at my local airport. I'd love to see more traffic coming in and out of this airport. What do I need to do in order to convince my fellow administrators, fellow commissioners, my city council, or my leaders that this is an investment, this is something that we should consider? Like, how do we make that step as a risk-averse government organization?
I would say a couple things. One, we want to move people from point A to point B quickly. That's not for every city or state or place, right? There's a lot of places that don't have traffic problems, that are still sort of emerging cities that haven't had to deal with a lot of the problems of tremendous growth quickly. But if you're in a place that has grown very, very quick, and you're thinking you're going to continue to grow, you're going to need new transportation solutions. And this is my own personal belief. Justine and I launched the New York City ferry service a couple of years ago, along with friends at EDC in the room. If you're not adding transportation options to your city's ecosystem, your city is dying. And I think we really need to be that aggressive about talking about new transportation and new ways to move people around cities and regions, because we see it all over the country. A city is in a place that's hot in a moment, they grow really, really fast, and then they start to choke on their own transportation challenges. I think we need to be forward thinking about the future of transportation. We need to constantly be investing in new ways to move people around, whether that be buses so that we can get people out of their individual cars, whether they be advanced aerial mobility, so that we can move people from point A to point B in ways that roads may not necessarily allow to do quickly. We need to think about autonomous flight and how to move people around autonomously, and we need to constantly be thinking about whether rail is an option. I would say advanced aerial mobility is great, but we need to be investing in all sorts of transportation, especially in urban areas, because that's the way cities are going to be able to grow.
Yeah, and Justine, I'm going to give you the final word here.
Okay.
Advice and recommendations for peers.
I will just say really quickly, know your why. Why do you want to pursue this? Is something that's first and foremost important. I acknowledge that everyone does not live in an urban community or an urban city, so the needs are going to look different from urban to suburban to rural to remote communities. So understand those nuances. Just because it looks good in a dense urban environment, that same application may not apply in a very rural or remote area. But there's still some opportunities to do things in this space. So I'd say that's another piece. I think education is always really important. Educate yourself, bring industry to the conversation and to the table. Call other states. Call me up. Hey, I have a question. Why did Michigan do this? How are you doing this? What has been the hardest part? I think phone a friend when you need to, especially if you're an elected official and trying to figure it out in your own respective city or location that you are in charge of. So I'd say that's another important piece of this. And I'd say lastly, embrace a culture of how might we. A lot of times it's easy to say we can't do this, the regulation's not there, things are taking a long time. And I get that, right? But there's also, I think one of the unique things about having an Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, I am the Office of Risk. I love the risk. I want to say, let's give it a try, let's test it somewhere, let's see what happens, and let's understanding enough that if there's an opportunity, how do we get to a point where we scale it and we help with commercialization? I'm often thinking about what is that true pathway to commercialization, and that's what's going to be the secret sauce of the states and cities that have a robust economic development portfolio and the ones that are still struggling to keep up.
Yeah, I often say that the key to unlocking innovation is changing the mindset from a no because to a yes if mentality. So that concludes our panel today. We ran short on time. Thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of your show, and let's give a round of applause to our panelists today.